everybody has probably worked at a company at some point where you had a leader or a founder or somebody who was one of those people who showed up every Monday and said, I was thinking about it over the weekend, and I think what we need to do is, insert giant left turn here. Burnout factory. Like you have to be able to have a set of goals that have been prioritized and agreed on and maintain that focus.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Dan Lyons, and today I'm joined by Drew McManus, CEO and co-founder of 33 Teams. Drew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
Awesome to have you. Now, for everyone listening, there's a good chance Drew has worked on some of the apps on the device you're using to listen to the podcast today. He's had a really successful career, over 30 years. In that time, he's worked at places like Apple, Adobe, Pivotal Labs. At Pivotal, you were the vice president of product, right?
That's right. Yeah, I was part of the team that actually ran Pivotal Labs.
Okay, very, very cool. I think most people know about that company and the software there. And then with, your decades of experience, I want to open the show up with a discussion on what makes companies successful. You've pinpointed curiosity as an invaluable component of great teams, which we're going to get to in 1 second. But before we go there, you're one of the co-founders at 33 Teams. What is 33 Teams all about?
Well, so we are a consultancy. We help customers, everything from startups to big companies, build software. But almost as importantly, while we're doing that, we help you get better at building software. So we help you learn about Agile, but we also help you figure out what's going to work best for you and your team and your culture.
Very, very cool. I love anyone that's helping software teams improve. Always a very, very difficult thing to do, especially when you're under the gun to deliver. It's like getting better while you're actually have like deadlines and stuff. Super difficult. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah. And it's actually really important that you do it while you're delivering, in my opinion. There's never the luxury to stop and like send everybody off for training or go to a course or something. Like the way we do it is by dropping in, and there's no better way to have empathy with your team than to work on what you're trying to work on and work on what you're trying to deliver and face the challenges that you're facing, but with like a wealth of experience of having worked with so many teams in the past, we often can see ways forward that might be harder for people to see who are inside of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, when I was a developer or even a team leader, I always felt a pressure from the organization to hit my deadline. Usually it was like a sprint, but sometimes there's a huge, release, or you have sales coming to you like, hey, we have like a 500K deal. They'll sign if by Friday we can prove that we have X, Y, and Z feature. I always feels like, okay, I'm in the weeds. I'm not always thinking about improvement. Do you have any tips on while you're under that pressure as a team leader, how to also say, wait, there's an opportunity to improve?
Well, so all teams go through periods like that, right?
Yeah.
Like there's deadline pressure, or there is a big fix, or there's a big patch, or there's all kinds of different pressure that come along. And even healthy teams run into tough times. Like that's just part of the business that we're in. What's important is that it's not always like that. A lot of people in the industry talk about sustainable pace. And sometimes people think that means, everything's chill all the time. It doesn't mean that. There are times that you've got to kind of burn that midnight oil. But the key is that that you're able to recover from those things, because otherwise what happens is you end up building up this mountain of technical debt that never gets paid down, right? Like tech debt serves a purpose, just like debt in the real world, right? Like sometimes you have to borrow to do what you need to do, but part of the plan has to be that you're going to pay it back, right? Like the bank doesn't loan you money to buy a house without a plan whereby you're going to pay it back. And so the same thing is true of technical debt. Like you may actually take some shortcuts and make some decisions to borrow some time in one of those pressure scenarios to make a deadline or meet a milestone, which is fine as long as you have a plan to recover from.
Actually love the way that you described it. I've never heard anyone describe it in that way of kind of like taking out a loan or a mortgage. And I think for, team leaders or anyone listening to this pod, most of the time you recognize when you're doing a shortcut or something that you say, okay, I'm doing this thing in not the perfect way to meet a business deadline. Right then, when you get that feeling, I think after listening to you, you can always right then go back to the business and say, hey, we took out a little loan here.
Mhm.
We're going to hit the deadline on Friday. We're going to ship, but we got to pay it back. Right. Very, very cool. Yeah.
I've seen it over and over and over again. These things don't get paid back. And what you end up with is teams where there's a great big piece of the application or a giant monolith that everyone's now afraid to touch because there've been so many shortcuts made, or there's been or the people who worked on it are all burnt out and have left the company years ago, or like there's always a reason why there's this scary thing that slows everybody down all the time. And that's just a symptom of not having gone back to pay those debts down.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing about it. If you let it build up too much, and that's why I wanted to make the point of speaking up when you feel that technical debt is hitting you. Because again, I think everyone feels it when you're doing the thing that is the shortcut. If you let it build up too long, it's very difficult to go back to the business and say, hey, we screwed up for the last 6 months or the last 1 year.
Yeah.
We've taken on so much debt that I don't feel like we can deliver any new features, for example, this quarter. That's a very difficult conversation to have, as opposed to right on the spot saying, hey, no problem, we can hit the deadline, but we are going to take the next iteration to pay back the loan or recover, as you put it. Now, the first topic that we're going to get into, it is around curiosity, but you said that teams need to be asking 2 simple questions. I have them written here. The 2 questions are, what's your name and what are you working on?
Yeah.
What is that? They seem very, very simple. What does that mean to you, or why is that important?
That's one of the tricks that my team uses to help make sure that the communication flows properly. Right. So a lot of time what happens when people decide they need more process around delivering software is process gets designed in the form of handoffs. And so when you ask somebody like, okay, we're going to check in some code, like, how does this work? Right. And it's like, well, I do a PR and then somebody in QA runs some tests on it. And then someone in infrastructure puts it into production. I always say, what's that person's name? And it's amazing how often the person doesn't know. Like, so you send it to somebody in QA. Who is that? And then the next question is, let's go talk to that person and see what they're working on. Like, hi, Dan, it's nice to meet you. Like, I just checked in some code. I'd love to see what it is that you do when you get this. Maybe there are things I can do to make it easier in the future, right? Like breaking down these like artificial barriers or these artificial, throwing things over the fence to the next milestone kind of things is what tends to smooth out the rough parts of process, because you humanize the person on the other side of the fence. You maybe find a way, you find some common ground, like, I can make your job easier by doing this. And actually that makes my job easier too. Like, so many times those things aren't discovered because we don't even know what that person's name is.
That totally resonates with me.
Mhm.
Especially because you brought up a pull request, a PR process, or maybe, merge into main, and then maybe some other, testing happens. Anytime that you're passing code or in the process that you need someone else to do something for you,
Yeah. Mhm.
there's kind of that natural, we call it at Linear B, we call it idle time, or like a natural barrier where you're going to see slowdowns.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've seen in my career so far, and you call it, knowing someone's name, which is perfect. Now it totally makes sense to me. It's like, what information could I put on this pull request for you that would make your review easier, your job? Like, what's the first thing you do when you open up my PR for a review? Could I add a piece of information there that would be helpful for you? And oftentimes what, when you do talk to someone like that, they'll say something like, yeah, I would love to know what ticket is associated to this.
Mhm.
What's the priority from your perspective? How long do you think it will take me to review? What is the complexity of the code? Where are you worried about? And it's like, oh, I didn't know for the last year that you like those are the things you wanted to know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And, having that be more of a conversation than a handoff, it just smooths things out. Like, even if you put into the PR something like, Dan looked at the earlier iteration of this and, here's a link to a Slack conversation we had about it. Like, boom. Oh my gosh.
Context.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, you're humanizing the process. You're wanting your team member who their name you didn't even know last week. You're wanting them to be successful because, like, there's a name attached.
Do you see that happen for most of the software teams you're working with, or is it like a big company problem?
I mean, it's definitely in big companies, but it's not exclusive to big companies. I think, teams that institute process without understanding the why behind process tend to make things that are very handoffy. Like,
Yeah.
you check this in and then you submit this and you fill out this form and you click go, because that's what you think of when you think of process. Whereas really, process is team interaction, and teams are made of people. And so anything you can do to tighten the feedback loops, or you referred earlier to that idle time, like,
Yeah.
I submit a PR and then have to figure out something else to work on until I hear back about that. There's like a context switch. There's turbulence in the process there, right? Some of that is unavoidable, but to the extent that you can smooth that out by saying, "Hey, I'm going to check this in, then I'm just going to like ping Dan and see if we could have a quick conversation about it." Like, that it smooths out some of those rough points in between tasks.
And I could see teams moving faster, improving quality. And then like the other thing that came to mind to me is just, the remote world that we're in, or at least a hybrid remote situation. You go to the extreme with the question of, do you know the person's name? There was a time when I was like very hands-on coding. Yeah, we knew everybody's name because we went to lunch together. We sat right
Right.
now, now it's kind of a situation. I could open up a PR and I don't necessarily have to know the person's name or who they are or what they need. It feels even more normal to maybe just say in Slack, hey, can you look at this PR? But again, I'm not actually meeting with this person. Have you seen any dynamic changes with remote work?
Yeah. The some of the benefits we got from offices, or especially open offices, as you're describing, where we ran into each other at the snack wall or whatever, like, a lot of that is evaporated. But, having interacted with a lot of teams over the last couple of years, you can see new norms that are emerging, where people, they might submit a PR and then they might post to the Slack channel like, "Hey, I'm in this Zoom room for the next hour if anybody wants to talk about this thing that I just checked in. Otherwise, I'm going to be working on X." And like, these like organic little conversations can still happen.
Yeah.
It's not for everybody, and there are some people who struggle with these kinds of interactions. Like, it requires a different interpersonal dynamic in some ways, and so I won't say that it's replacing or smoothly taking the place of the other interactions we used to have, but there are new norms that are establishing themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. The other area that I see this a lot in, we brought up the PR because I think that's, kind of a natural handoff type thing. It's actually between support and engineering,
Yeah,
something that we're actually diving in at my company now at Linear B as we have more and more customers. There are, support cases. And if you just ask, for example, engineering can go to the support person and say, or vice versa, actually. Support person could go to engineering and say, what could I put into this ticket that would make your life easier? Because I don't really know what you do when you debug this thing.
hmm
Oh, then they'll like open up like a world of things.
yeah,
I would love to know what browser they were using. I'd love to know time of day that this happened. You can get into a 20-minute conversation that can actually improve the whole thing.
yeah. And one client in particular that's coming to mind for me is one we worked with last year that had a lot of these communication issues. And one of the terms we ended up using a lot was giving people a seat at the table, which of course is completely metaphorical because everyone was working remote. But, they would have these conversations where, let's say they were working on a new service to extract some functionality from the monolith. And they would talk about the architecture and they would talk about how they were going to do it. And they'd talk about how to design the API. But you know what? Why weren't the infrastructure people in these conversations? Like, wouldn't it be great for them to be in on the ground floor of that? Like, let's open up a seat at the table and just give an option for somebody from the infrastructure team to come listen in and maybe say, you know what, we saw with this other team that when they got to deploying, like they ran into X, Y, and Z, like there's benefit that can come from getting people in those conversations, even though they might not obviously have a seat at the table.
Mm-hmm.
And so having team meetings that were a little bit more inclusive of various people around the organization was key. Another thing that we saw was that because they didn't really have this kind of inclusive culture in terms of these meetings, there were a lot of informal communication channels that got put in place, which have pros and cons. Like, for example, there were a couple of salespeople who were very gregarious and very good at establishing relationships with individuals on teams and therefore getting the things their customers wanted prioritized, which may or may not have been the right prioritization framework.
This is what salespeople do. They have
Yeah,
natural skills to get what they need.
and so not having a table where the right people were seated and saying, well, yes, that sounds important, but there's also this other thing, right? Like this, having conversations that were more out in the open and more inclusive of all the voices that needed to be included really solved a lot of like kind of backroom dealing that was going on.
Well, here's a question that comes to mind. Whose job is it to either connect people or make sure that some of these simple questions are being asked? Whose job is that on the engineering team?
Well, it's everybody's job in a way, but I realize that sounds like a cop out. I think it depends on the team. It's often the product manager, to the extent that you have one. It sometimes is the engineering manager. But, one of the things that I see on teams is that leaders emerge from all over the place. And it's not always the person who appears to be the leader on the org chart or on the roles and responsibilities matrix or whatever you're using to decide who gets to decide what. There are people on teams who have knowledge or experience or relationships, either internally or externally, that make them the best person to do some of these things. And the trick is recognizing it and giving them the authority and the permission to do those things. And so, the gregarious salesperson who's out there, working the organization to get stuff for their customer has energy and has their heart in the right place. Like, why not have that person take on some more responsibility in terms of prioritizing across customers? Like, let's harness that leadership capital.
Right. Well, then the way that you describe it, it sounds like a combination, because the people that are really hands-on, even if we go to let's go back to the PR process, who's going to notice first that something could be improved in the PR process? Probably the person that's putting up the PR and then waiting a really, really long time to get their code reviewed or whatever it is. So it's probably like an individual contributor developer feeling the pain first.
Mm-hmm.
But then it also sounds like from a leadership perspective, a team leader, there's got to be some type of encouragement of, hey, developer, like you're totally empowered to change this process. Let's go and talk to your reviewer and let's make a change immediately. Go for it.
Well, and what if that conversation ends up being, hi, what's your name? It's nice to meet you. So tell me what you do when you get your PR. It's like, oh, you run this test suite? Can I get that test suite? Is there a way for me to run that before
I'll just do it myself. And I can tell you if it passed or failed on the PR.
Right. And so those kinds of things, like you're not going to get in trouble for improving how the process works. And so having those conversations, you can make small improvements that catch on like crazy.
We have a topic around curiosity So let's define how you think about curiosity for the audience.
Yeah. And this is really where the what's your name mechanism came from, because it gets you asking questions and it gets you interested in what your team members are doing and what they like about it and what they don't like about it. And then you can ask what makes things easier and what, why don't you do it this way? Or have you ever seen this? Or, curiosity gets people energized about solving something or learning something or making something better. And I think especially in tech, I mean, this is probably true in just about every industry, but especially in tech, many of us got into it because of curiosity. And so it tends to be a pretty common trait amongst people who are in tech. And so if you are curious about something someone else is doing, they're probably going to be curious about what you're doing. And that's where the collaboration gets better.
Yeah, actually that really makes sense. I mean, the DNA of people, software developers, engineering type people, usually you're trying to do something that is an unknown.
Yeah.
So, hey, go create this thing for me that no one's ever created before with me. Okay, I'll figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think what you're saying there is kind of that DNA to be curious, which is a good thing for all of us.
Yes.
That what
Yes.
came to mind to me when I saw, interested in the topic of curiosity. Sometimes I do get stressed, or I did get stressed. Again, there's, pressure to deliver on time. There is pressure to uncover unknowns and come with a solution. I felt like when I was in that situation of stress or anxiety, or maybe I'm stressed because, hey, I put up a PR and I don't know when it's going to get merged. I don't know what's going on the other side.
Yeah.
When I switch my mindset to, hey, just be curious.
Mhm.
It's so, just when you go and talk to that person, you're not trying to actually solve anything. You're just curious to uncover an unknown. I felt like my stress level went down. I got better results.
Yeah.
I got a better conversation back from the other person because they didn't feel like I was like pressuring them. It was just,
Yeah.
I'm interested.
Another project we did recently was one of those ones where there's, the big core piece of the app that no one wants to touch because it's scary, right? And we relied very heavily on curiosity to help teams build some confidence to get in there. It's like, okay, let's just agree we're going to write some code today that we are going to throw away at the end of the day. And I wonder what will happen if we do this, or let's write a test to see what this thing does if you do this, or like it becomes like experimentation. And and you've freed yourself of some of that pressure that you're describing by saying, we're going to throw this code away. So it doesn't matter. And pretty soon you learn some things that when you come back the next day and say, okay, today we're actually going to write some code that's like for reals. You can say, oh, well, yesterday, remember when it did that weird thing? Like I was thinking about it overnight and I have an idea of how this is going to work now. Like curiosity, right? Like exploration. Those are all parts of what make us productive and better software people.
I mean, when I think of doing like a good job, it's delivering on time, high quality, high efficiency, solving problems. Have you seen that curiosity mindset improves performance
Oh,
for
yes,
teams?
definitely. It improves performance, it improves confidence, and it improves communication because when you're asking questions, you're actually talking to each other and you're learning things that you more quickly than you might have otherwise. Cause you don't have to learn every single thing yourself. You're learning as a team.
Do you have any other, you gave a good tip for, I think, software engineering manager or leader. You said like, hey, whatever we're doing right now, we're going to throw this code away,
Yeah.
which kind of like lets everyone's guard down. Do you have any other tips to try to set the tone for a software team to get into that? I think it's
Yeah.
like also the creative mindset there.
There are a couple of tricks around collaboration that I think are really important. I'm a big believer in pair programming when done properly and modding when done properly. And, not every problem is appropriate for a pair or a mod, but a lot are. But it's also one of those things that's tough for a lot of people to do, especially if you haven't done it before. And so that's another trick, kind of like the, hey, we're going to throw this code away thing is like, hey, I'm going to try to do this thing that seems kind of hard. Like, anyone want to hop onto a call with me and let's just walk through it together? You'll notice I didn't say let's pair on this, and I didn't say like, I need help. All I said was I'm going to be trying something weird. Like, is anyone interested in trying weird things? And inevitably somebody will jump on because of that curiosity. And so that is a trick that I find works really well to kind of jumpstart the team operating together rather than working in a siloed fashion.
That's pretty cool. And probably the person that jumps on is the right person
Well,
in that situation, because they're the ones saying like, okay, I'm just like interested too. I probably has the right mindset.
Yeah, it's exactly. And so you jump on and you've got that same mindset and it's like, oh, well, hold on. What if we tried it this way? Or, this reminds me of a thing I worked on before and here's how that worked. Again, you're shortcutting the process because you don't have to learn stuff that this other person already knows. They're going to just teach it to you.
Is there a set of characteristics when you see pairing work well?
Yeah. So it's hard for some people, especially at first. And the thing that is really important is that you're prepared to talk and that you're prepared to think out loud. And there are things, exercises you could do to help kickstart that. But the most important thing is that you just kind of say, okay, well, I guess I'm going to set this up this way. And you're just talking out loud and that gives the other person the opportunity to jump in and help you or speed things up or say, hey, can I try something? Let me take over for a second. So the most important thing is to start talking.
Very cool. I have a note here around the concept of a fictional rivalry.
Mm-hmm.
What is that all about?
That's what builds up when you have teams that aren't connected and aren't talking to each other. And, you get teams that are like, oh, well, those people over in infrastructure, they don't understand what we're doing. And again, if you say, oh, really? Who is that? Like, what's their name? Like the answer is, oh, I don't actually know those people. Like they've built this like phantom of the people on the other side of the fence that tell them, no, this can't go to production because they don't understand. They haven't taken the time to connect and build empathy and to understand like, oh, I didn't realize that you wanted things done this particular way. That's just a different way to configure my IDE. Like, that's no problem. I can take care of that. Right. Things always seem darker when you can't see past the fence, right?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. It even happens to me sometimes where I'm building up, and it's usually because like you're saying, there's not enough connection or communication. Even when like I'm waking up in the morning, if I'm nervous about something at work, or I think, hey, these people don't want me to succeed or they're going to be against me. I'm going to put, I'll put up my PR. They're going to hate me. They're going to give me like bad comments. And it's really building up something that's not, it is fictitious.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I connect with the people or the person that I built up this worry about, typically it goes the exact opposite way. Oh, I like built up this story and really it's not so bad. I gotta remember that next time.
So true. I mean, people call it othering, right? Like anytime you're taking a group of people and thinking of them as others or rivals in some way, you got to stop yourself and kind of say, we all came to work here at this company. We all must be interested in what we're trying to do. Like, wouldn't it be better if we just went and found out, like, hey, it seems like you always reject my PRs and I'm wondering why, like, can we talk for a few minutes? And
yeah,
almost without fail, you're going to find that they're not bad people. Like, let's figure out a way to work together. And that's why, a lot of what we do at 33 Teams is not, we're technology consultants and we're technologists and we come in and we help you write software, but it's almost more about sociology and anthropology than about anything else because software is made by teams and teams are made of people. And so understanding how we interact with each other and how we got to be the way that we are as a team or as a company or as a culture is a big part of getting better at building software. I mean, it's so much of it is about these interactions, and so much of it is about the way we talk to each other, or the way that we treat one another, or our understanding of what of how we should work together. That's the stuff that more often needs to be fixed than necessarily, getting better at a particular framework or language.
I assume maybe like I don't know, an engineering leader might call you, or maybe it's the head of an organization. Maybe it's a people person. I'm not sure. But when you come into a software organization or a particular team, what are the questions that you start asking?
So generally we will show up, and it's often, as you're saying, it might be an engineering manager, it might be the CTO. And there's generally some sense of, we need to get better at this, or things seem to go so slowly, or quality is a problem. There's generally some root thing that needs to get improved. And that's why they call us. And so we come in, and generally what we will do is, first, I'll take several members of my team and just embed them in your team. And so we'll say, look, just pretend we're like new arrivals, like onboard us, invite us to the meetings. Like, we're going to come to stand up, and we're going to come to your planning meeting and whatever. And for the first few weeks, we're mostly observing, like, okay. And some of it is process stuff, like, oh, they have a planning meeting and here's how they run it. And, this could be better or whatever, but like, there's process. But then there's also the people stuff, like, who does all the talking in these meetings, or who only speaks up occasionally, but actually has great value when they do, or who seems to have the best relationship with that other group that everybody's always pointing the finger at. Identifying those people who, like I said before, might not be the actual leaders on the org chart, but are leaders in terms of either a particular piece of the product, or a particular expertise, or a certain set of relationships. Like, we identify those people too. But the most important thing that comes out of those first few weeks is we try to identify a handful of things. So let's say 4 or 5 things that we can help you change, that will have the biggest impact on what you're trying to do and your business. So we don't show up with like the one true agile set of stone tablets that say you must do these things and you must do them this way, because that's disruptive. What we do is we show up and go, based on what we're seeing, the number one thing is, and I'm making this up, but the number one thing is the role of product management needs to be much more clear. And below that, A, B, C, D, E. And number two, you really need to increase your focus on test-driven development. And so here's what we're going to do about that, A, B, C, D, E. And not be like, so there'll be 5 very clear things. It's like, this is what we're going to do. Your planning meeting is a little weird the way you run it, but it's not the end of the world. So we're not going to like spend a lot of time like trying to reinvent the way you do planning meetings. It's okay. It's fine. As long as we do these other 5 things, this is where you're actually going to see the improvement. And so that's part of what comes out of this sociology, anthropology thing is, here are the things you're going to do, and here are the people that we're going to really leverage to help make it stick.
Yeah. I mean, with your company, 33 teams, I think that there'll be an endless amount of demand because I've been in this industry long enough to know that. But we do have a lot of startup companies that listen to this pod, team leaders that maybe cannot afford to bring in a 33 teams yet.
Yeah.
What advice do you have? Is there common pitfalls that you could point out that maybe they could do a self-assessment and have a takeaway here?
One of the great things about being a startup is that you're laying all these foundations, whether you realize it or not. And so, one thing I tell founders often is, let's start with a culture of quality. Like, let's start by really caring about test-driven development. It's really easy to throw it overboard when you're feeling tons of urgency and deadline pressure, but without a plan to pay it down, you're taking out a really scary mortgage at that point. And so that's a decision you can make early. Like, when we estimate how long it's going to take to do things, we're including the fact that we're going to test drive everything. Another thing is around infrastructure choices. And I've got one person on my team in particular who has a lot of passion around decisions you make early about how you're going to run your app and how you're going to host your app. And that are decisions that you can end up stuck with for a really long time. And so making some smart decisions early is really important. So We're actually working on some blog posts and stuff around that that'll be coming out later this summer, because that's a thing that we see from startups and growth companies that we sometimes wish we could turn back time there. But I think the most important thing is just exactly what we've been talking about, Dan, which is fostering a culture where we all work together, where we collaborate on everything, even if it's a little bit coloring outside the lines that I have on my particular page. Like, we are all in this together as a team, and let's not set up process that is based on handoffs. Let's set up process that's based on collaboration and communication and, getting better.
We discussed the PR process is a good place to have a reminder on that.
Mhm.
I had brought up, because I've been seeing it recently, the process between support and engineering.
Yeah.
Is there any other ones that come to mind for you that it's like, here's some good, natural areas where process and handoffs do exist that we
Yeah.
didn't cover?
So I think that's another good one. So I think the support is often the last team to find out about stuff. And sometimes they feel like they find out about stuff when it's too late. So again, opening up a seat at the table so that someone's in the room when decisions get made. They may or may not influence the way a decision gets made, but at least they know about it. So that's a good one. Another one is sales. I think that often product teams are very distant from sales culturally. And sometimes they are people who come from very different backgrounds, and they are sometimes people who come from very different communication styles. And so that can be a difficult bridge to build, but I've seen it work, and when it does, it can be amazing. And you get input from customers in a way that you don't otherwise. And so again, opening up that seat at the table and having salespeople involved in your conversations, it also helps them build a lot of empathy for what the team might be going through to meet that milestone, or to do the extra thing that that customer needs, or to help support that deal that's going to close this quarter if we could deliver X. So, having a window rather than a fence between any team helps.
Actually, that's a really good one. So when I first started my career, I was on the engineering track. I was a VP of engineering. Company got acquired. I'm one of the founders at Linear B, as most people know that are listening to this pod. And I ran, or was responsible for, the sales organization and the success organization. So change roles.
Mhm.
And I cannot emphasize enough what Drew is saying. If you're on the engineering side, find someone from sales. I know sometimes they're a little bit different. They have a different communication style. They might dress different. They might
Yeah,
talk a little different.
that's
Find
right.
someone from sales, bring them into some aspect of your iteration, have them talk to your engineering team about how they present a particular feature, what are prospects and customers saying. It's like
Mhm.
invaluable information, I think, back to the development team. And then, yeah, like you're saying, Drew, there are going to be issues in the product, that empathy back and forth of, hey, I found a bug in my prospect demo. Well, if you have a good relationship with sales, they're actually going to come to you and give you a lot more information. Here's
Yeah.
what was happening. Here's what they did. Here's what they clicked through. Here's what they told me. So really want to double down on that point. We do have a final topic that I want to make sure that we get to. The topic is titled in our script, shipping at all costs, which we've touched on a few times.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what are you seeing out there? What is that? What's going on there?
Part of the reason this comes up is that, back to something we discussed earlier, Dan, there are times when you've got to pull out the stops, right? Like, there can be deadline pressure or competitive pressure or whatever that says, look, you know what, we've got, as a team, we're going to turn up the heat and get some stuff done. As long as that doesn't become the culture, that's okay. I actually worked with a company a little while back at this point, where part of their values, like written on the document of their values, was shipping at all costs. I I was I was horrified. Like, you can't have that be a baseline of how you operate your team or your company, because it just leads to burnout. Like, people are constantly in that mode. You build up this tech debt that makes their jobs just incrementally harder with every day that goes by. They get to the point where they've got a coffee mug on their desk that says something like shipping at all costs on it, but they feel like they're stuck in quicksand because like it just gets so hard to do stuff. And so you end up with these Walking Dead teams that, you can just kind of see it in their eyes. And then the next thing that happens is people start to leave and they go work somewhere else. And so then all the knowledge and code ownership of this probably messy code base you've been building is walking out the door. And so you just get into this spiral where it becomes very, very hard to recover. And that's because you instilled this culture of burnout. Like you created a burnout factory. And even if it wasn't your intention, and even if it happened by mistake, these are things that you really have to invest in fixing. And it can be very hard when it's become a part of the team culture.
Okay. How do we fix it?
Well, a lot of it has to do with slowing down, and a lot of it has to do with becoming really, really good at prioritization. Because the way you get into these shipping at all costs kinds of modes is that everything is the most important thing. And every customer is the most important customer. And every competitive thing has to be met head on. You can't. You can't. And so becoming good at just ruthless prioritization and saying, oh my God, did you see competitor A today said that they're doing X? You have to be able to stop for a second and say, that's actually not the most important thing for us to worry about right now. It might have seemed like it when I read it on Twitter this morning, but now that I slow down for a second and think about it, no. Like we talked about, this quarter is all about addressing A, B, and C. X isn't on that list. So you know what? We're gonna live. I'm gonna write it down to talk about another day. Because otherwise, and you see this sometimes, everybody has probably worked at a company at some point where you had a leader or a founder or somebody who was one of those people who showed up every Monday and said, I was thinking about it over the weekend, and I think what we need to do is, insert giant left turn here. Burnout factory. Like you have to be able to have a set of goals that have been prioritized and agreed on and maintain that focus.
Mm-hmm. The mindset, because I have been in situations, and I've been in situations where shipping at all costs mentality got a lot of early praise in a startup. Hey, we delivered, or we did it sooner, or so it starts feeling good. Oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. But I think one of the maturity lessons that I went through that I want to share is you got to start taking pride in keeping focus for the team.
Yes.
Hey, I was able to say no to that really smart person, sometimes a founder, who over the weekend actually came in with an incredible idea. But I was the person in the engineering organization or my team that was able to consume that idea, talk to that person and say, hey, it's a good idea. Here's where we can get it done in a responsible, time frame. But this is what we're doing right now. That other amazing thing that you wanted to deliver on, it's still amazing.
Yeah.
Like that takes a lot of, at least for me, it took a lot of maturity to navigate how to have that conversation.
And, we've talked some today about leaders emerging on the team and leaders who aren't necessarily the org chart leaders. For me, the shining example of that is the person who emerges to have the confidence to say, okay, what I'm hearing is that competitor A came out today and they've got X, and it's super important that we respond to that. And I think that we can, as long as we can set aside B and C for a while, right? Like in order to fit in this newly prioritized piece of work that we have to do right now, I'm suggesting that we delay or set aside or postpone these other things that we were working. Like to me, if I were the leader of that organization, that's the kind of behavior that I would really want to reward, much more so than the person says, okay, we'll find a way to do everything.
Totally makes sense to me. Drew, it's been a really good convo here. If you had to say one thing to summarize that someone could take action on immediately,
Mhm.
what would it be from our conversation today?
I think it's important that you identify what are the things that we can change incrementally that are going to improve the way we deliver software. And that means having some awareness of what the problem is. So a lot of times, I'll talk to CTOs who are like, I just don't understand it. I don't know why we're not making more progress. You really need to kind of like ask a lot of whys about that to get down to like, what's making you feel that way? Is it quality problems? Is it, things get stuck in PR loop hell? Is it that teams don't have everything that they need? Is it that you're not able to hire the way that you need to hire? Like, let's diagnose what the handful of things that need to change is, and let's just change those. So often people want to hit a giant reset button and try to just completely change the way that the organization operates. It almost never works. So it's about focus. It's about really trying to decide what's the high value thing we can do and just do that.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Drew. Really, really awesome information here. I can tell from our talk today that you have a wealth of knowledge, and really happy that you're there for the community with 33 teams to be available to help. How do we get in contact with you? And also, what type of team is the best type of team to come, work with you?
Yeah. So, the way that we like to work with teams is we like to meet you where you are. So if you feel like, there are things that your team could do better, first of all, reach out to me. You can just email me. I'm Drew@33teams.com. And let's talk about how we can identify just the few things that we could help you get better at. Maybe it's TDD. Maybe it's process or product management. Maybe it's the way that you do infrastructure or deploying. Like, let's pick something and we can help you get better at that thing, which will make the team better overall. Again, we don't show up with some magical playbook that says we have the one true way that teams operate. We understand your team and how your team operates today, and like, what are the knobs that we can turn just a little that are going to have a big effect.
Okay, perfect. So everyone, definitely check out 33 Teams. Email Drew if you want to chat with him and start working with 33 Teams. We'll also try to get the links to those blogs that you're working on, Drew. We'll put them in the links below in the description. I also want to say thank you to more than the 3,000 of you who are now subscribed to our weekly interruption newsletter. We bring you articles from the community, inside information on weekly pods, and the first look at Interact 3.0 on October 25th. If you haven't already been to Interact, totally recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It's free. It's all online, so you can register today. And Drew, thank you again for coming on Dev Interrupted.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.